I recently received a question about coaching philosophy and coaching strategy and how it relates to different athletes. So, specifically, the question was, should a coach change their philosophy and principles based on the athletes, or should they keep it unchanged? So that brings up a really interesting point in terms of how you adjust what you do based upon the athletes that you have. So obviously there are a lot of different ways to be successful. I'm sure you can think of various coaches, both that are well known and those that aren't well known, that you know within your coaching life, that have done things very, very differently and had success. And so it's pretty similar to last week. You can do things pretty differently, but you have to make up for that in certain ways. So it is possible to have a very different training and coaching philosophy from a different coach, and both have really good success. And you see that with all sports, with coaches that have very different philosophies in terms of how they plan football strategy or basketball strategy or anything else that you might see. And so what's not effective is trying to mix and match from all of these different philosophies and just kind of doing certain things at sometimes and other things at others. You have to have a consistent way of doing things. And I think that is really important. And so you have to know what you value, you have to know what you're going to focus on, and you have to know what you're going to emphasize. Because if you don't, there's not going to be any sort of consistency. And consistency, probably more than anything else, is what's going to be most important for getting athletes to improve. They have to be doing things that are appropriate, but they have to be doing them consistently so that they can actually improve at them. So now, a philosophy or how you think about what's important for effective swimming really is only valuable in terms of what it allows you to do. So you actually have to start doing things and implementing it in order to get any sort of result that you'd want. And that's where things become a little bit more challenging, because you will have athletes that are different. You will have athletes that have different strategies, different outlooks, different physiology, different temperament, different skills, all sorts of different things that are going to be different. And so the skill in coaching is taking that philosophy, what you think is important, and then applying it differently to different athletes. And to me, you can be really consistent with your philosophy and what you believe is really important for fast swimming, and then apply it differently to different circumstances. And so what are probably the two things that are most going to influence how you apply your philosophy or what you think is important? There's two key things. The first is, what events are the athletes preparing for? And so what do those events demand? What do the events demand of the athletes? And then two, what attributes do certain athletes bring to the table? It's pretty obvious that a 50-meter freestyler and a 1500-meter freestyle are going to have to approach things pretty differently. They're going to have the same needs. They're going to have to do all of the same things, but they're going to have to do them in different ways. And so both the athletes will need to do some sort of aerobic conditioning. However, the 1500-meter athletes' aerobic conditioning is probably going to look very different than the 50-meter athletes. So however you like to implement aerobic training, you can still follow that basic thought process, but you're going to have to apply it a little bit differently for those athletes, because their needs are going to be different because of the events they swim. You could say the same thing about speed. Again, you can think about it in the same way, but apply it differently for the 50-meter athlete and the 1500-meter athlete. That might look different in terms of how much they do it or how often they do it. So you can still focus on what you believe is most important. However, you're just going to have to do it in a slightly different way based upon the events that athletes swim. And so the second consideration is that certain athletes have their own needs independent of the events they swim. So I'm sure you've come across athletes that you've coached that swim the same event and go about the same time, but they do so in a very different manner. Perhaps one is a lot more speed-based and one's a lot more endurance-based. Recently in a coaching experience I had, there was 4 athletes on our team that all swam the 200 breaststroke, and they all made the championship final of the meet that we were at. Different athletes are going to need different things to be successful at the same event. So the event demands influence what they have to do, but they're also their individual needs are going to influence what they do. And so if someone's really speed-based, having them do tons and tons of endurance stuff is probably not going to be really effective for them. You have to consider what athletes need and what they're good at. So how do you actually make that work within a training program, within a club, within a training group? That's where you have to make small adjustments that can make a big difference. For instance, if you're doing an aerobic set of 2100s and then you have a 1500-meter swimmer and a 50-meter swimmer, perhaps the 50-meter swimmer can take every third one off, or they can just go 75s or something like that to make things a little bit easier. And then the 1500-meter swimmer, relative to everyone else, could perhaps do it on a tighter interval or be challenged in some other way. And so in that respect, you do have to get a little bit more creative to help adjust what you're doing so that the athletes get what they need and there's some sense of order within the training environment. And this is one of the biggest challenges in coaching, is how do you have an effective philosophy, an effective way of doing things, and then also adjust for individual athletes and do so in a way that's logistically sane. And so oftentimes it's going to happen with small adjustments that can make a big difference, and by doing the same things in different ways. And sometimes the hard answer is that logistically you can't give a certain athlete what they really need based upon what you believe in and what most of the other athletes need. And then sometimes your club or your team isn't going to be the best option for that athlete. And that can be a really hard thing for everyone involved. However, sometimes that's what needs to happen as well. Now, to come back to the original question, I think it's critical to maintain consistency with how you do things and what you believe in, because that's going to be the best way to get consistent results. However, you have to adjust and modify how you apply that philosophy and how you apply how you go about thinking about things in order to help each athlete get the most out of their experience and improve as much as they can. And while that can sound like it requires a lot of extra effort, it sometimes does require more effort, but more often than not, subtle adjustments can make a really big difference, and those adjustments are often all it takes in order to get everyone moving in the right direction. What I do have confidence in saying is that on the other end, if you just have everybody do the same thing all the time, the odds are not everyone's going to be nearly as successful as they could, and so you're going to have to adjust the application of everything in order to help ensure that everyone has the best opportunity to improve. Hope that helps. If you have any other questions, definitely let me know.